Ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to continue eating. You pay for lunch, so you better eat it. Just don't make too much noise. Kishore have spoken here 7 times in the past 25 years. That's one time every 3 years or so. But he never told us the reason for his success. And he said that in a recent speech that he gave in Singapore that I heard together with a few friends of mine. All of them have something to do with the Asia Society. And Kishore thanked many people, but at the very end he said the real reason for his success is because of a 4-letter word. And my antennas were up. I have never heard Kishore use 4-letter word except that one time. And the 4-letter word is A-N-N-E, Ann. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome Mrs. Mahbubani. Ladies and gentlemen, and take a bow. It's so great to have you. Great to have you. Anyway, Singapore is a small country, but a very, very important country. And it has produced over the decades truly amazing world leaders. Today it is to launch the memoir of Kishore in Hong Kong. So I propose to him that today, instead of talking about all the geopolitical stuff that he usually talks about, many of us know his views anyway, and at the very end I will ask him to summarize it for everyone. But before that, I want to explore instead his personal journey. How the heck did he become what he is today, besides Anne? And how did Singapore produce so many brilliant diplomats that Hong Kong know not of? So I will try to spend time on the personal side of things first, hopefully with some revelation for we in Hong Kong that maybe one day we can catch up, and we certainly need to catch up. So with that, I will first turn the podium to our guest of honor here today, Kishore Mahbubani, who will make some opening remarks, and then I will engage in a dialogue with him before opening to the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Ambassador Kishore Mahbubani.
Thank you, Ronnie. That's a really, really warm and generous introduction, but I have a complaint about Ronnie. My punchline was going to be the 4-letter word. But obviously Ronnie and I are on the same mind. But anyway, it's such a pleasure and delight. As Ronnie said, I've been here so many times. I feel like this is my second home, being here at the Asia Society in Hong Kong. And I'm very happy to launch these memoirs here, Living the Asian Century. So what I propose to do in the brief time I have here, in about 5 or 10 minutes, is to try and explain why I wrote these memoirs at this phase in my life, especially after I turned 75 last year. And when I reflected on my life, I realized that I had been in some ways quite privileged. Because if things had gone the normal way, I shouldn't be standing here talking to you. When I was born and brought up, a different destiny awaited me. And when I was born in Singapore in 1948, in a very poor third world developing British colony called Singapore. And my family also happened to be quite poor. So we went through a lot of hardship. In fact, at the age of 6 months, the doctor told my mother, "You've lost your son. He's gone." I had a severe case of diarrhea, and the doctor said I wouldn't survive, but I survived. I made it to the age of 6, and when I went to school at the age of 6, when I arrived, they weighed all the boys coming in. And sure enough, when they weighed me, they said, okay, you're technically undernourished. So I was put on a special feeding program when I was 6 years old in school. They had one pail of milk, one ladle, and the 12 undernourished boys shared the same ladle from one pail of milk, and of course, increasing our immunity in the process. But I can assure you that times have changed. I've gone from being undernourished to, as you can see, overnourished. But we had suffered other deprivations. We didn't have a flush toilet in the home. And, my parents also came from a poor background. My dad had a very rough life. And indeed, when he was sent to work as a peon in Singapore in 1933 for 5 cents a day without any parental supervision, he developed bad habits and began drinking, smoking, gambling. And that was a life that my father led. So it led to a lot of dramatic incidents in my youth. Amazingly enough, I actually can't recall some of them. But I have a good friend, Jeffrey Sung, who could actually amazingly recall things that I had forgotten. So what I want to do, if you don't mind, very briefly, is to read from a passage of a recollection by my good friend Jeffrey Sung, whom I've known since the age of 6. And he lived about 100 yards down the road. And he described how one afternoon he and his family were sitting on the veranda. Suddenly they heard the noises, people running towards an incident. And so he joined the crowd and began running to the incident. And this is how he described what happens. He says, as I approached the junction, a crowd was building up in front of the corner Kopitiam. Kopitiam is a coffee shop. There was a large crowd which spilled the street, blocking off motor traffic. I pushed my way through the crowd, asking the onlookers in Malay and Hokkien dialect, "What's happening?" "It's a fight," someone replied. As I nudged my way, this is Jeffrey Sung saying this, as I nudged my way, body against body, to the front row, a police car arrived. A policeman was already walking past the tables on the shop floor towards a large counter where the shirtless, Hailam Chinese owner of the coffee shop was standing. People's attention was directed to a particular spot next to the large counter. They were looking at an Indian man standing by a table with a broken Tiger beer bottle and a broken beer mug. His white shirt, wet with beer, was torn and spattered with blood. He had an unshaven square face and a neatly pomaded shining black hair parted in the middle. It suddenly struck me that he was Kishore's father. The shirtless coffee shop owner was standing nearby, but hesitated to approach. Kishore's father, the object of attention, looked drunk and fiercely defiant. Meanwhile, the policeman who came from the patrol car made his presence felt and started asking questions and waving his notebook. I couldn't hear what was said. Then, I suddenly noticed that Kishore had shown up next to the policeman and was calling out loudly, "Dad, Dad." He went up to his father and took his arm lightly with an anguished expression said, "Please come home, Dad," said Kishore. The Indian man with his torn shirt let himself be led by his son out of the kopitiam. The crowd parted to let the father and son pass through. I watched them cross the street together. Kishore's house was almost right across from the kopitiam. Kishore walked his father up the front steps, leading to the door of the house. The door opened and they disappeared inside. Now you can clearly see that this was a traumatic incident for a 10-year-old boy like me, but I recollect none of it. Even after Jeffrey described it, I can't remember it. So it shows you in some ways how faulty memories can be. I can remember other things. I can remember when my neighbors came to my house and said, "Kishore, come out. You have to go to the drain nearby." I say, "Why?" They say, "Your father is sleeping in the drain. He fell in after he got drunk." Then I can remember when Chinese gangsters come to the house wanting to collect gambling debts from my dad. My dad rolled under the bed And I had to tell the gangsters my father wasn't home. But what I do remember is the look of sheer terror in my father's eyes when he heard about the gangsters coming. Now, I tell you all these stories so you have an understanding of what I said, that it wasn't my destiny to be standing here in front of all of you. It was my destiny to suffer from a poor childhood, live with poverty, not go to university, not study, not travel around the world, and certainly not go speaking around the world. So what happened? And you'll realize that in life, luck is very critical. And in my case, the luckiest thing that happened is that when I finished high school, I ended up working as a textile salesman in a Sindhi textile shop. And my destiny was to be, frankly, a textile salesman the rest of my life. And I was earning $150 a month then, which is about $50 a month. And then, out of the blue, I got a letter from the Public Service Commission saying that I was awarded the President's Scholarship. And with the President's Scholarship, I could go and study in the university, and I would be paid $250 a month. So my mother said, $250 a month is more than $150 a month. You go to university. And it's actually quite shocking that if that accident hadn't happened, I would never have smelled a university at all. I wouldn't even have known what higher education is all about. But I ended up in a university, did quite well. And in university, given my circumstances, the logical thing I should have been done was to have been a good student, studying hard, getting A's in exams because I was given an opportunity. Instead, I became a student radical. And, I can tell you just one quick story, and I'll tell the story because one of my classmates in university actually is in this room. He actually witnessed the same incident which I witnessed. Because one year in 1969, soon after the May 13 riots in Malaysia, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew came to address the university students. And after he finished speaking, when question time came, he was harangued by a philosophy professor, Ms. Dr. Lee Beng Chi, one of my philosophy professors, about abortion. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew listened for a while, then said, okay, I've heard you, let's move on. So he told the chairman, Mr. Aranaya, a young student, Mr. Chairman, it's time for us to move on. But there was a very brave young student chairman. He said, I am the chairman. I decide. We carry on. And at that point in time, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew stood up, pushed the student chairman off the podium, and said, I'm taking over. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Then, of course, after that, I was the editor of the student newspaper. I wrote an editorial said, I can understand why Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was frustrated. But when you start pushing chairman around, this is the slippery slope towards dictatorship. So I said Mr. Lee Kuan Yew could become a dictator. And after I wrote the editorial, I told my editorial board, let's sign the editorial together. My editorial board said, no, Kishore, this is so brilliant. Why don't you put your name on it? So foolishly, I put my name on it. But this turned out to be an amazing accident because that's how the founding fathers of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, Goh Keng Swee, and Rajaratnam, first heard of me. And I can tell you, if you read this book, you find that I learned so much for them. I wonder if I hadn't written that article, if I hadn't put my name to it, would I have been where I am today? So I hope what this book does, it tells you the remarkable transformation of my life from where I started and to where I have come. And I hope you will enjoy reading the story. Thank you very much. I look forward to being interrogated by Ronnie.
Kishore, is your college student, the American exchange student, is he here in the audience?
This American one-year visiting student actually flew from Colorado to Singapore for the book launch in Singapore on August 15th. I want you to know that he flew from Colorado to Seattle, Seattle to Singapore, economy class, sitting in the center seat.
Tell us about that story.
Yeah.
How that changed your life as well.
Yeah, and this is another amazing, I hope you realize as a result of the stories how lucky I am. When my friend Dean Swift came to Singapore, we became good friends. And I kept telling him, I envied him, he could travel. I said, I wish I could travel. Of course, we had no money, so I couldn't travel.
That was 1969?
69.
And 69. He was an exchange student.
He was an exchange student. So at the end of the year, before he was about to leave, he came up to me and he said, Kishore, it's time for you to travel. He gave me an envelope. I opened the envelope. There was $2,000 in US dollars in cash.
Wow.
In 1969, as a gift to me. And after that, I went up to visit. I took a hitchhike up Malaysia, took a train from Penang to Bangkok. From Bangkok, I flew to Calcutta. From Calcutta, I took a bus to the border of India and Nepal. And then in Nepal, I sat on top of a potato sacks truck and made my way all the way to Kathmandu. And I could travel because of the gift.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Anyway, over the last 25 years maybe, Kishore, you and I first met because we showed up in the same events, and you spoke on behalf of Southeast Asia, and I spoke on behalf of myself, but on the subject of Hong Kong and China usually. And both of us believe that Asia has a bright future, and so we fought off a lot of the doubters, how that Asians cannot think, or something like that. And so we were comrades at arms, in a sense, except that when it comes to ASEAN, then he and I disagree. He thinks that ASEAN is the best thing since motherhood and apple pie, and I am still a doubtful person as far as really how bright the future of ASEAN is. But doesn't matter, it does not take away from the fact that Kishore is one of the most bright, articulate person on geopolitics that I know anywhere in the world. I'm amazed how that in Singapore, I'm sorry, Kishore, I got bad news for you. You're not the only brilliant guy.
How shocking.
How shocking. I can name many others. Tommy Koh used to participate in Asia Society events a lot in this part of the world, including coming to Hong Kong regularly in the 90s and even into the early 2000s. Chen Hengqi, who succeeded you at the United Nations as a representative of Singapore. Hengqi succeeded me when I left the chairmanship of the global chairmanship of Asia Society. I was very honored that Hengqi would agree to take my place. And then you have other people like George Yeo, who is equally brilliant. You have people like you mentioned, no, I don't know if you mentioned Bilahari Kausikan, who unfortunately had a very terrible, sad personal incident in China. I don't know if it has anything to do with his negative views about China, but he, on the one hand, you and George and others on the other, it is amazing how Singapore produce so many great brains, even when they really disagree with each other. In Hong Kong, on the other hand, produce no such people. We produce a lot of other kind of good people, great people, business leaders, right, artists, what have you, but that's one thing that we don't produce. And the reason I can think of is Singapore is a state. Hong Kong is never a state. Hong Kong is always just a city. And Singapore has Lee Kuan Yew as the leader, and then you have Goh Keng Swee and Rajaratnam that you mentioned also. Those are truly brilliant people in the last century. And Hong Kong have no such privilege of learning from such great minds. So tell us, why can Singapore produce such great minds in geopolitics?
Well, great question. I'm just a quick side note on ASEAN. As Ronnie pointed out, we have different views on ASEAN. There's one statistic that everyone in Hong Kong should know. In the year 2000, Japan was the second largest economy in the world, as you know. And at that time, Japan was 8 times bigger than ASEAN. Now Japan is about 1.2, 1.3 times bigger than ASEAN. And by 2030, ASEAN will be bigger than Japan, what was the second largest economy in the world. And I tell that because I know some people in Hong Kong are worried about Hong Kong's future, what your future might be. One growth area that is very close to Hong Kong, that Hong Kong can tap on, that would welcome Hong Kong, is ASEAN. So that's why I would say people in Hong Kong should pay attention to ASEAN. Now, on why Singapore has produced, you're right, very, very talented diplomats in many areas. I think the key difference is that Singapore had to undertake a very tough political struggle to get to where it is today. So if you read Mr. Lee Kuan Yew's, as you know, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew's memoirs are fascinating. I think Mr. Lee Kuan Yew acknowledges that the struggles that he went through forged how the man he became. So as you know, he lived through the Japanese occupation of Singapore, which was brutal, really, and he'll tell you some amazing stories in his memoirs. And then he had to live through a British colony, not too bad, but still Singapore struggled against British colonial rule. And then we joined Malaysia in 1963 and ended up having a very acrimonious divorce with Malaysia.
Within 2 years.
Yeah, which was also another struggle. And when Singapore became independent in 1965, the British media unanimously said Singapore is going to fail because this is a city without a hinterland. And as you know, the leaders of Singapore cried when Singapore became independent. They didn't celebrate, they didn't say hip hip hooray because they thought Singapore would collapse and fail.
Including Lee Kuan Yew.
Including Lee Kuan Yew. So you could see, therefore, that it was an immense struggle that the three founding leaders of Singapore went through: Lee Kuan Yew, Goh Keng Swee, Rajaratnam. And as a result of that struggle, they developed a certain toughness of spirit, which is quite amazing. I mean, I got to know these men. I think one of my key goals with this book, my memoirs, Living the Asian Century, is to tell you stories about these three men. And they were, I think, I've met many great world leaders. I mean, I've shaken hands with Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush. I mean, like you have Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski. But the three leaders of Singapore are on par, if not better, than most world leaders that I have met, which is remarkable.
True.
Now, it is because of these remarkable leaders, then if you work with them, in some way or another, you're pulled up by them. Because you learn so much from them. And they elevate. So all the geopolitical analysis that I do, and all the 10 books I've written, I could not have written them if I hadn't sat at the feet of these three geopolitical masters, who in their turn had to go through lots of geopolitical struggles to achieve the kind of understanding that they did. So it was a sort of a cascading series of events, and that sort of led to where we are today.
Well, we all know Lee Kuan Yew, but we don't know him intimately. I have had the privilege of meeting him quite a number of times, even in small occasions. But you are very close to him. And I was told by Hang Chi, who is, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, the global chair of Asia Society right now, the co-chair, Ambassador Chan Hang Chi. She told me that Lee Kuan Yew used to bring three people together. From descending in terms of age, the oldest is Tommy Cole, who was the chairman of the Law of the Sea Convention for the United Nations. He became Singapore's ambassador to the United Nations at the tender age of 30. You told me that. And then CHANG, an academician turned politician and diplomat. And yourself, Lee Kuan Yew would spend time with the three of you. What did he do with you guys? Was he there to listen to you guys? Was he there to lecture you guys? What do you learn from this man?
Well, I can tell you that we did learn a lot. And by the way, Tommy Koh, Chan Heng-chi, and myself, another thing that's common among the three of us is that we were, at our young ages, we were also dissenters. All three of us had been critical of the Singapore government when we were in university.
So how were you suppressed?
How was I?
How were the three of you suppressed?
Well,
did you get enlightened by Lee Kuan Yew?
Well, we definitely got a lot of scolding. In fact, if you read my book, you'll find that every senior Singaporean has been scolded by Lee Kuan Yew. And whenever senior Singaporeans met, it's a badge of honor. You know what? How Lee Kuan Yew scolded me or not?
That's why I'm no good, because he never scolded me.
And so but the remarkable thing about Singapore is that even though the three of us were well-known dissenters, the government realized that we could be useful. And so they invited us to work with the government. So Tommy Koh went from being a lecturer in the law faculty to becoming ambassador to UN at the age of 30. Chan Heng-chi went from being a lecturer in political science to succeeding me as ambassador to the UN. And then I ended up working for the government because of my bond from the Singapore President's Scholarship.
But you became the Singaporean ambassador to the United Nations at the tender age of 34. Most 34-year-old is, I hate to say this, but still wet in the pants. I was when I was their age. Were you wet in your pants? Were you?
Well, I actually, I to be correct, I wasn't 34, I was 35, much older. It was to me, again, a tremendous opportunity being, when you're thrust into a very big job. And for me, the hard part was that I was succeeding Tommy Koh as Singapore's ambassador to the UN, who had already been ambassador to the UN for 13 years altogether. So Tommy Koh was a legend in the United Nations, and I was asked to succeed a legend. And the one lesson I learned is that when you're asked to succeed someone who's very, very successful, whatever you do, don't try to step into his shoes. Don't try to. I didn't want to copy Tommy Koh. I said Tommy Koh had a certain style of speaking. I would choose my own style. I wouldn't try to do what Tommy Koh does in the way that he spoke. And so I had to evolve my own character, my own personality, and my own way of doing things. But of course, nonetheless, it helped a lot that I was succeeding Tommy, because Tommy was so well known. Once I introduced myself and said, I'm the successor of Tommy Koh, everyone would open their doors to me. So in some ways, I also wrote on the coattails of his success.
Sure enough, Kishore has a very, very effective style, including your style of speaking. And many of you know that I can be a little hot-headed. And I go pick a fight in the international arena for the last 40 years. And oftentimes, Kishore will be the gentleman sitting next to me, and I would be going with whoever, and Kishore would just sit there and smile, and after I finish, he would just speak one simple word in my support in a most gentle way, and the other guy wasn't defeated by me, defeated by Kishore. And his style, I call it killing me softly. I don't know, Anne, if that's what happened to you too, but it's none of my business. I better not delve into that. But your style is certainly very good. Just a little story. One day I got a phone call when I was the vice chair of Asia Society. The chair at that time was Richard Holbrooke. He called me up. He said, Ronnie, I just want to let you know that we have appointed Orville Schell to a position at the Asia Society, knowing that Richard knows very, very well that I would be very upset to have appointed that guy into a position. at Asia Society, of which I was the vice chair. So he did it after he appointed him because somebody gave us a lot of money to endow a chair. So Orville and I have known each other for 35, 40 years. We always disagree. I still remember hosting him lunch, he and his wife, in San Francisco when he was still dean of the journalism at UC Berkeley, trying to change his mind. I never changed his mind. But the best moment I've ever seen happen to Orville Schell was when he interviewed you in New York at the Asia Society. For those of you who haven't watched that, I encourage you to watch it. And Orville was hot-headed about China is bad, China is this, and then Kishore just killing him softly, did the job bloodlessly, except that when he walked out of the door, suddenly somebody found that there's blood all over him, such as the Chinese saying, 刀不血刃. But anyway, so when did you discover that perhaps you are meant for greatness? At a 10-year-old, you can pull a bloody father drunk in front of everybody and the policeman, and you can just gently let him back home. Did you discover your greatness that day? You don't even remember it. So was there some moment that you discovered, perhaps I'm meant for greater things? Was there such a moment?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say it was not one particular event per se, but at each stage of my life, I would say I was blessed with good teachers. So I describe in my book, for example, and I didn't go to actually I applied to join the best school in Singapore, Raffles Institution, and I was rejected not once but twice.
Why? Your grades were not good enough?
No, I wasn't bright enough, so they rejected me.
Wow.
But anyway, I ended up going to schools where I had very good, in St. Andrew School, I described my teachers, I had very good teachers, very inspiring teachers. And then I went to university, and again, in the philosophy department, I had remarkable teachers. In fact, one of them, Colin Davis, later came on to lecture at the University of Hong Kong. And I'll never forget the lectures that Colin Davis gave, because he would get so engrossed in his lectures. He would be thinking so hard. And in those days, you could smoke in the classroom, you know. So there he was, thinking very hard, smoking. And then suddenly, before you realize it, his hair is on fire from the cigarette. And he's still thinking, he's not even aware that his hair is on fire. So the students would rush up and, beat out the fire in his hair. But it happened not once, but twice or thrice. So that was a lesson to me of how engrossed you can become in philosophy and in arguments. And you'll see in my memoirs, my love of philosophy really made a big difference. It sort of opened it was like, as they say, education is not about filling a bucket, but about lighting a fire. In my case, my studies in the philosophy classroom basically set off firecrackers in my brain. And those firecrackers in my brain, I think, helped me then subsequently, whenever I got involved in arguments, as you mentioned, then it was my training in philosophy that taught me to analyze exactly what somebody is saying. He says X, he means Y, and this is a consequence is Z. Do you really want to, is that the path you want to go on to? But it's the philosophical training that enables you to dissect arguments in a way that is quite remarkable.
You'll give credit to three teachers of yours, one of which, of course, is Lee Kuan Yew. The other two, Kok Keng Swee and S. Rajaratnam. What are they like? What impressed you about them? What did they teach you?
Well, I would say they're very, very different individuals. I mean, Lee Kuan Yew is a very forceful politician, a forceful person. So if Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was standing up there speaking to all of you, you would all be sitting at the edge of your seat listening to him, because he's an amazing speaker. Now, if Dr. Goh Keng Swee then came up to the podium after Lee Kuan Yew and started speaking, you would all fall asleep. Literally. I'm not exaggerating, because what he does is that he has a text, he looks at his text, and then he reads. And he's an economist. He never ever looks at the audience. So he's just constantly just reading what he writes is absolutely brilliant. But if you can't connect with the audience, you can't do that. Now, Rajaratnam, by contrast, was also a very colorful person.
Was an economist.
He was an economist, right. An absolutely brilliant economist.
With a doctorate degree.
As you know, one of Singapore's major success is that it's an economic miracle. And the man who is truly responsible for the economic miracle is Dr. Goh Keng Swee. And he is incredibly hard-headed also, as hard-headed, as tough-minded as Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. And it is very unusual in most governments to have three very strong, powerful individuals who can get along with each other and work with each other. Because normally when you have strong individuals, you also have political competition among these individuals. And then they start fighting each other. But the remarkable thing about Singapore's founding generation is that they were able to work together as a team and complement each other very, very well.
What was Rajaratnam like?
Mr. Rajaratnam was, if Mr. Lee Kuan Yew came into this room and he stood up there and you faced him and if you confronted him, you would get very frightened of Lee Kuan Yew. I mean, he is a force of nature. But if you met Mr. Rajaratnam, you will never get scared of him. He's the nicest guy in the world, very friendly, constantly smiling, not in the least bit intimidating. Yet, if it comes to a political fight, Rajaratnam was a fierce fighter. I'll never forget once when I was in Cuba, Havana, attending a non-aligned conference in 1979. At that time, Singapore was fighting the Soviet Union, And as you know, Castro was allied with the Soviet Union. So we had a fight with Castro over the Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia. And because many of the delegates there were pro-Soviet, Castro invited us to attend a small meeting where he invited very powerful third world leaders like Saddam Hussein, Hafiz Assad, Yasser Arafat, all of them, and to intimidate Mr. Rajaratnam. And I felt intimidated when I was in the room because all these powerful leaders were there. Mr. Rajaratnam was just a foreign minister. These were all heads of government. He wasn't in the least bit intimidated by any of them, and he fought like a lion. And Mr. Rajaratnam, if you had a struggle, if you wanted a lion to fight with you, Mr. Rajaratnam was a lion.
What made the three of them work together? How come they didn't fight?
Well,
they fight, but it did not prevent them from working together for the good of the country.
I think it was a common experience of suffering together. Suffering the Japanese occupation, fighting the British for decolonization, fighting against the Malaysian politicians when we were in Malaysia from 63 to 65. And remember, there were times when the three of them could have lost their lives. In the Japanese occupation, they could have easily lost their lives. And I think at some point in time, when the tensions between Malaysia and Singapore became quite serious, there was a possibility that they could have been taken to jail and imprisoned. So they went through real hard political struggles. And when you fight battles together, you develop a camaraderie and trust, which is amazing. And so these three men trusted each other. No, they had different views, I must say, and they would argue with each other. And they would be very blunt and direct towards each other in the arguments. And I actually was present sometimes when they argued with each other.
Now I know what's wrong with Hong Kong. We didn't have to fight. In 1997, everything was prepared by Beijing for us, and the British were left with little choice. And so Hong Kong became part of China again, like since time immemorial. And it's too easy. And so we didn't have any struggle, any fight. I'm not proposing that we Hong Kongers should go through a tough time. I'm very thankful that Hong Kong was able to return to China in a very, very peaceful way. But that comes with its baggage, as we all know. From your perspective, Kishore, looking from the outside, and as a friend of Hong Kong, I know you. We have known each other for a long time. As a friend of Hong Kong, what can you advise us? Do we need to develop politically savvy individuals? We just don't. Civil servants are not meant to be politicians. They did not have the training. In fact, they were prevented from touching politics under the British. And after 1997, they are thrown into the lion's cage and they have to become politicians. And it's very, very tough. Both the ones like Tung, who were brought in from the outside, or the civil servants. Do we have a chance of producing great brains like Singapore does in geopolitics?
Well, I think you're right when you say that Hong Kong didn't have to go through any struggles. You made a peaceful transition from the end of British colonial rule to becoming a part of China. But I can tell you one thing, in case you are all bored, the next 10 years will be very exciting for Hong Kong, because you have become a key political football in one of the greatest contests of all time, in the contest between the United States and China. So Hong Kong will be kicked around, as a football in this game. So I would say that if ever there was a time for Hong Kong to develop geopolitical reflexes, it is now. You must actually understand the forces that are operating against Hong Kong. And there are various things you can do, by the way.
Such as?
Number one, I'm not sure whether you have put together, it doesn't have to be a public declaration, at least have somewhere in the Hong Kong government a small private think tank that tries to monitor the great big geopolitical game that is being played between the US and China, and how it's going to affect Hong Kong. So you must at least have a team studying all the moves and the consequences.
The last CE of Hong Kong dismantled that. He ended the CPU, which is a Central Policy Unit. So we're going the wrong direction. What's number two?
Now, number two, I would say, you're right, you're part of China. But remember, it is not one country, one system. It's one country, two systems. And what you need to emphasize is not just how you are part of China, which you are, but also how different you are from China, right? You have the British legal system, and you're clearly not a Chinese city in the way that a city in China is. And what you can do to help deflect the geopolitical pressure coming towards you is to emphasize that you are different, and that you are, in a sense, you're part of China, but also have a different system. And as a result of that, at a time when American politicians are trying to isolate and bring down Hong Kong, you can become a magnet for global talent. And the global talent will come here because they're, on the one hand, interested in China, which is frankly still the world's fastest growing economy overall in many ways, and at the same time want to live in a place that is close to China and yet also different. So at a time when many of the major Western countries are shutting their doors to global talent, United States is, Donald Trump wants to close the border, even Canada, the world's most open country, Justin Trudeau just announced he's going to raise immigration barriers. So that there's a tremendous amount of human talent in the world. So just as I was a young boy in a coffee shop with no hope of going to university, but I ended up going to university and then succeeding. There are lots of young people like me in the world who are looking for opportunities. And Hong Kong can attract that global talent. And if you can do so, if you become a magnet for global talent, then frankly, that will create a self-reinforcing virtuous circle that will strengthen Hong Kong.
You use a phrase that in passing, that I don't know if, ladies and gentlemen, you guys pick it up. I did. And the reason I pick it up is because it's exactly the same thing I've been saying for the last couple of years, and I find no resonance among my friends in Hong Kong. You said that U.S. is trying to bring down Hong Kong. We are collateral damage. We're not the main target. But in order to hit Beijing, you hit Beijing's son, so to speak. And hence, you give Hong Kong hell, especially as a financial service center. If America doesn't hit you hard in that area, I think America is asleep, and America is not asleep. And yet, what I'm afraid is Hong Kong people are asleep. Hong Kong government is asleep. And by the way, we are more left than the Beijing leaders, it seems, to be more like them, so to speak, rather than emphasizing, as you have proposed, the uniqueness of the two systems. Now, in the old days when Anson Chan used to propose one country, two system, to the neglect of the one country, I was the first one against her. Now I'm saying that times have changed. Yes, we respect 100%, 150% the one country. But this is the time that we also, I have to borrow a page from Anson Chan, not exactly, to emphasize the two system as well. So I think that Hong Kong is undergoing a lot of changes at this stage.
I think what Hong Kong needs to develop is a very high degree of sophistication in its understanding of geopolitical developments. And it's important for Hong Kong society also to develop that kind of understanding, because these are the forces that will be shaking you. I mean, you put up all these warnings, typhoon warnings, right? I mean, it's good, you should, right? You should have a geopolitical typhoon warning also. And put it up on the street and say, hey, a geopolitical storm is coming. And that geopolitical storm, believe me, can do more damage than your Typhoon Yagi can do. So, but you got to develop, therefore, the antenna, the capacity to understand what is going on, what is the game that is being played. And that, frankly, was the best legacy that the leaders of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, Goh Keng Swee and Rajaratnam, left behind in Singapore. Because Singapore, when it comes to geopolitics, is one of the best performers in the world. Because we know how to manage all the great powers. In fact, even as you and I are sitting in this room talking, I was just on CNBC from 11:30 a.m. to 12 noon talking about the visit of Prime Minister Modi to Singapore. You know, and Singapore is such a small country, and yet many of the world leaders come to Singapore to interact with Singapore. So clearly we know how to engage the great powers and how to deal with them. And that's something also that Hong Kong can and should develop now.
I can assure you, Kishore, Hong Kong does not have those kind of talents. If anybody know anything along that line, it's already in this room, because they are my friends. And I am amateur, they are amateur. Are there people in Singapore we can engage to advise us, help us? Can you give us a few names, at least half as good as Kishore Mahbubani? Are there such people?
No. I mean, this is actually something that you have to struggle with yourself. I mean, you know why? It's if you don't feel the struggle yourself, you won't be able to understand the consequences that flow from it. So you have to develop it internally, and sometimes you will succeed, you will make mistakes, but it's actually the process of making mistakes is when you learn from what you do. So Singapore clearly has made lots of mistakes too, but it's from the mistakes that we learn what we did right and what we did wrong.
You know, Kishore, you and I agree that the world is a very cruel place. You said something in your book, page 85 or something, that Tommy Coe disagree, but I'm with you on that point. That is, the international arena is a jungle. There are laws, there are rules, tribunals, and conventions, and this and that. But they are only there as tools of the major powers. And it is very much a jungle, as you have described. But Singapore, on the other hand, was able to do things that are against the bigger boys. And you do things that are politically incorrect. And Lee Kuan Yew didn't give a damn about it. And he insisted on it. For example, Singapore's educational system, while educating every man and woman as much as possible, they also are very elitist. Today, in much of the world, including Hong Kong, if you were to use the word elite, that we are the elitist, we train elites, you will be banished. And Singapore is able to do that. Has Singapore lost that edge today because you are now wealthy? Or are you still bucking the trend, pushing the envelope, in doing what makes sense, frankly, common sense, and hence succeeding?
Well, I think the good thing about Singapore is that we have in some ways made a very important transition. Well, in the early years, we succeeded because we had very strong, exceptional leaders, as I mentioned. And we've had, I must say, this is unusual, by the way. I mean, if you look at the United Kingdom, for example, you look at the recent prime ministers. I mean, Boris Johnson was a joker. His successor, Liz Truss, was a joke. I mean, you can see, therefore, if a country like UK has difficulty producing great prime ministers, Singapore has been very fortunate. We've only had 4 prime ministers and 4 exceptionally competent prime ministers. Very different,
agree,
but very successful in their own way. But this also reflects the fact that over time, as we have developed, we have also developed strong institutions in Singapore now. So, for example, in the early days when we started off, when I joined the foreign ministry, there must have been about 15 or 20 people in the foreign ministry. Now there are over 1,000, I believe, diplomats that we have. So we have grown significantly, and we have developed the institutional bench strength, plus what you might call muscle memory. So we remember episodes and how we handle crisis. I mean, in my book, I describe what happened when Mr. Lee Kuan Yew very bravely decided to expel an American diplomat in the 1980s. Now that's amazing. In those days, the United States was clearly by far the most important country in the world. Singapore was a little tiny dot, little tiny red dot, and we decided to expel an American diplomat. And that obviously is a very risky thing to do. But if you read my book, you'll see how Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was very careful in the way that he managed the whole thing. And he could, as Giorgio once said, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew is a man who can unleash a political storm and pull back a political storm.
Wow.
Now that takes incredible skill, by the way. Incredible. Lee Kuan Yew had that, right? But now we have developed the institutional bench strength that replaces some of these things.
Before opening to the floor, can you give us a summary of how you see the world today in no more than 5 minutes? You said that Hong Kong will have a hard time in the coming 10 years. I agree. And you said somewhere else that China will have a lot of challenges in the next 10 to 20 years because of the United States, hitting on China.
Yeah.
But can you tell us what you think, how it may end? Number one. Number two, what about some of the other major players in the world, like Russia, like Indonesia, like India, Japan? Can you say a few words?
Well, actually, to give you a decent answer, I must follow Fidel Castro and give you a 3-hour speech now. No, but I think if you give me 5 minutes, the thing that the key point I want to emphasize to everybody is, I'm very glad that I'm alive today, because I think you're going to see incredible changes over the next 10 years. The world is changing fundamentally on many fronts, okay? Right? I've spoken about the end of the era of Western domination of world history. That's happening as we speak. The return of Asia, that's happening as we speak. And all this is creating a whole new world order. Now, if I want to give a very brief summary of this world order, I describe it as a 3M world. 3M is not the company in Minnesota. But 3M stands for one, multi-civilizational.
Multi-civilization.
So because they're with the end of Western domination of world history, there are many successful civilizations in the world, including the Sinic and Indic civilizations, China and India rising clearly. And then number two, it's multipolar. So you used to have very clear centers of power, one or two centers of power. Now, you're moving in a world where there are many independent poles, and even some of the middle powers can assert themselves and behave completely independently of the great powers. So the capacity of the great powers to control the game in the way that they could in the past is diminishing.
Can you give examples?
Well, I give you an example. In theory, Turkey is a NATO ally and should be listening to United States and should be, compliant with United States. But Erdogan is completely independent. He maintains his separate relationship with
Russia,
Vladimir Putin, and he takes the independent positions on many issues. So that's one example, but there are many other such examples. I'll give you another example. Even as we speak, it's quite amazing. The Malaysian Prime Minister has decided to go to Moscow. Now, I'm sure that it's going to anger the United States and Europe, but he's saying, I'm an independent leader. I will do what I want to do. So the sense of agency that the middle powers have is more than it was in the past. And the third M is multilateral. And so you will see that as we live in a small global village, where we live, everything is interdependent and we have to work together. In a small global village, you need global village councils, and therefore multilateral institutions, whether it's the United Nations, G20, or even regional multilateral institutions like ASEAN. Multilateralism is going to become stronger and stronger in the world.
姐妹们总烦恼脸上细纹、干燥与暗沉，现在起跟我一起放心交给 KS Royal Face 皇家颜值逆时奇迹系列。KS Royal Face 皇家颜值逆时奇迹系列，它添加5种 EGF， 专门防止肌肤老化，强化皮肤修复，增加肌肤弹性水嫩，轻松抚平皱纹，换回青春自信。KS Royal Face 皇家颜值逆时奇迹，护肤露、全效精华、精华霜，即刻启动冻龄密码。